What's going on, everybody? This is Clydean Fair. Let's talk about Wartales Advanced Swordsman Builds Edition. So obviously we've been doing some polls on the channel here and there, and we're trying to drum up which videos you guys would like to see first in our advanced build series, and Swordsman won out. So without further ado, let me go ahead and hop on into it because there's a lot of information here that I need to cover. Guys, this save is still going to be the same save that I was using for my previous runs. So in other words, this is an early access save, but it is compatible with 1.0. Obviously, this being said, though, I had access to previous path quests when I was originally making this. So that's why you're going to see some items here. I'm going to give you some replacement items as well for those of you who are starting out fresh runs in 1.0. That way you guys will have decent substitutions, and then you'll have something to look forward to whenever these items get re-added into the game. All right, guys, first and foremost, we're going to be starting off with a tank build. Now, this tank build is actually going to be a mix between a tank and a riposte spam build, and it's kind of a best in slot swordsman build at this point. I really enjoy using it. So in order for us to get started off in the build, we're going to be grabbing Fighter. Fighter's going to give you destabilizing strike. It gives you an extra engagement ability, which is going to help out with the riposte spam later on. Next up, we're going to be grabbing Valorous Duel. Valorous Duel, once again, generates a valor point every time you engage an enemy, and it's going to help us out in the long run, especially once we get to late game, and we're going to be chaining multiple attacks. Finally, we're going to be grabbing Bulwark. Now, you could swap Bulwark out for the counterattack ability early on, and both of them would work fairly well. However, we're going Bulwark because this is still supposed to be a tankier unit, and I would go for survivability early on and not necessarily damage output early on, because when you're around level 5, you're not going to have a lucky charm available right now. If you happen to have a lucky charm, counterattack will work really well, and that will give you more damage output on the tank for the time being. If you don't have a lucky charm, grab Bulwark instead. It will help you a lot with survivability. Next up is actually going to be something that you're going to get from the Duelist class, and the Duelist class you'll unlock once you go to Grinmere and defeat, I believe it's Berna's arena. You have to defeat Berna's arena and then go get the Duelist class, which is from the Rousting Fields, I believe. Anyway, once you get that, you're going to be grabbing Master Opportunist at level 8. Don't worry, respecking is totally viable here. And once you get Master Opportunist upgraded, you're really going to see how this build's going to come together. At level 10, we're going to be grabbing Intervention. Intervention basically gives us an extra engagement opportunity. It's basically a taunt, except it only works when there's an enemy engaged with an ally. However, it does help out quite a bit. So intervention is something that I'm grabbing instead of defensive riposte, because defensive riposte doesn't actually trigger your riposte damage. It simply gives you a little bit something, and we want to take damage with this build. Finally, we're going to be grabbing class specialization from a previous level, and then we'll be grabbing either Bulwark or counterattack, depending on which one did not take at level 5 or respect. So once we have all of these specializations grabbed, let's get into the actual kit of this. First off, we're going to be grabbing Glory. Glory you're going to get from the same arena that you unlock Duelist from. And on Glory, we're going to be running Unstable Oil and Putrid Oil. Unstable Oil gives you that 25% chance to follow up with an attack of opportunity every time a skill does damage, which is going to help because you're dealing like 6 skills in this build. So that's going to give you a little bit of extra damage output. On top of that, since it's an attack of opportunity, it scales with Master Opportunist, so it's just really good. Unstable Oil you can get from the Ludern Tombs of the Ancient, and then Putrid Oil we can get from the Grinmere Alchemist, which will be in the same region that you're getting Duelist from. Putrid Oil gives you a chance to apply Fever every time a skill deals damage. And what Fever is it's a 10% incoming damage debuff. So it scales really well, and you will start really shredding through people after a little bit of time. Next up, we're going to go with an Acadian Steel Plate Armor, 3-star. Now, this is just a lucky smithing deal once you hit level 12, but altogether, a 3-star level 12 item is going to have comparable, if not better, stats to a level 13 item. I'm running Reinforced Layer of the Oxus here. Once you finish the Ludern Tracker Hunt, you'll be able to get these. This round was a level 13 roundel that I got off of Inquisition Paladin units, or you're going to be getting it from a Wandering Trader. On top of that, I've got a Mustard Tonic. So Mustard Tonic is going to reflect 5% of my maximum armor every time I receive damage. So essentially, what's going to end up happening is every time I take an attack of opportunity, I'm going to take 1 or 2 damage between my deflection combination with the reduced incoming attack of opportunity damage from Master Opportunist. And then because of that, I'm still going to have a Thorns effect and deal 30 some odd damage every single time that I take damage. On top of that, I'm going to be hitting really hard because I deal extra attack of opportunity damage and Comforting Shield adds a little bit extra there. On top of that, I went ahead and maxed out my skills. I grabbed Wrath, I grabbed Taunt for sure. You need both of those. I also grabbed First Aid and Run just for funsies. And Glory works really well with this because it also gives you the ability to have protection. So basically, if you're fighting something that you're not going to be able to riposte spam down, if you, instead of using a riposte spam with a disengage, you actually use Glory to give you protection for a round, you'll guaranteed survive whatever damage is coming at you for the next big clap. So this is really useful for tanking champions, for example. So not only does this give you a lot of single target damage if it's an engageable enemy, it also gives you the ability to still be a tank, and that's what makes this build so good. Our second build that we're going to be getting into is going to be called the Flame Walker. Now, the name of that build is going to be a little bit of a giveaway, but it's not necessarily that much different from what your standard AoE damage output would be. So first off, we're going to be grabbing Swordsmaster. Swordsmaster gives you the laceration, and upon upgrade, it only requires one attack. So that gives you an AoE attack. On top of that, we're going to be using Valorous Chain, so we're able to generate Valor Point every time you use an AoE attack and hit multiple enemies. At level 5, we're going to be grabbing Daring, which helps us apply Weakening every time there is a bonus active on us and we deal damage to an enemy unit, so it's going to be really solid. Weakening as a debuff basically makes it where an enemy is going to be dealing 50% less damage. After that, we're going to be grabbing Hardcore Training. Upon upgrade, it gives you Rage whenever you're lit on fire, but because this is a Flame Walker build, we're going to be doing a lot of fire. So we're going to be gaining Rage, we're going to be immune to the burning that we're going to be causing, and it's going to be amazing. After that, we're grabbing Defensive Riposte because honestly, it's the best in slot for this tier, and I really don't necessarily want to be pinned down in a position where I may be in trouble, and giving you that 50% chance to counter an attack of opportunity with your own is just too good to pass up. Finally, since this build isn't going to be super built around anything else that really needs another passive, we're going to be grabbing Exhort as our bravery skill, which gives you and all allies within 6 meters of an area Zeal for 2 rounds. And what Zeal does is it gives you a 30% boost to critical hit chance and critical hit damage. Going into our actual items, we are going to be grabbing the Knight of the Eyes sword, which you can get from paladin units as well as wandering traders. On top of this sword, we're going to be using Paralyzing Oil and Misty Oil. Paralyzing Oil you can get from the Ludern Neprin clan alchemist, and the Misty Oil you can get from the Ludern Garusa clan alchemist. So both of those are really useful. What Paralyzing Oil is going to do is it's going to apply slowdown with a 50% chance every time you deal damage, which is going to help you be able to kite down enemies because you're removing half of their movement speed. After that, you're going to have Misty Oil, which basically gives you splash damage since enemies are most likely going to be next to each other. Since you're going to be trying to use Valorous Chain to trigger Valor Point generation, it's just going to give you extra splash damage. On top of that, we're going to use the Acadian Steel Brigandine, which gives you, a nice 3-star medium armor. We're using Reinforced Layers of the Serpent here, which are not necessarily available in 1.0 as of yet if you have not done the path quests before they got reworked previously. Since this was an early access save, I have access to these, and these are going to be best in slot for it. However, other good opportunities for this will end up being the Lair of the Rat, which the Lair of the Rat you should be able to get at the Virtue's Tracker Hunt once you finish that. After this, we're going to be grabbing the Paladin's Roundel for our shield, which is going to give you a nice amount of guard and flaming strike. And obviously, since we're doing fire, our Knight of the Eyes sword applies fire damage whenever you hit multiple enemies. You literally light the ground on fire. And then with flaming strike on your shield, you'll always be able to at least have one form of fire going somewhere else. And if it spreads to you, cool, it doesn't matter. And then finally, we're going to be grabbing Misty Oil Concentrate because this is just going to give you a little bit of extra splash damage, and you're always going to proc Misty Oil if people are next to you. Overall, additional skills, I went ahead and grabbed Taunt. There aren't really any other extra skills that you need here. I highly recommend grabbing Wrath just because it gives you extra damage output. And then for our stat spread and professions, we went ahead and grabbed Woodcutter. And for our stat spread, we got willpower up to 15 and or 16, depending on what you're able to get on your overall willpower numbers, just so you can get that resist dying. We went ahead and pumped movement up to 20 as well. I really like having higher movement, at least 14, if not more. My favorite number is around 20. And then I dumped literally the rest of it into critical hit. Like, absolutely, the rest of it goes into critical hit. Moving on from our second build, we're going to go into our third build, which is called Slicer. Now, Slicer is kind of a misleading name, I'm not going to lie, because it is actually going to be more of a debuff AoE, get in quick and then run away build. So starting off, we're going to run with Swordsmaster, follow with Valorous Chain, and I've already covered both of those in the previous build, as well as Daring, and also Hardcore Training and Defensive Riposte. This is literally almost a carbon copy specialization-wise from Flamewalker, except this is going to be slightly different. At level 12, we're going to grab the class specialization and then use hand-to-hand combat, which gives you disarm. Slicer's entire purpose is for him to run around the map, applying disarm and debuffs to enemy units to make them easier to handle for the rest of your army. So, in order for us to do that, we're going to need a better weapon. We're going to use Claret. Claret is one of those community bounties. I'm not entirely sure on where you can get it. The regions may have changed up on me, so I'm going to have to do a little bit more research, and I will pin that whenever I'm able to find Claret. I will make sure that it is pinned in the comment section below. On top of that, Claret gives you Debilitating Stab, which basically applies Dazed. And what Dazed does is it removes any damage from an attack of opportunity that an enemy would be doing to you. So in other words, even if you get pinned down, you're going to be able to disengage for free because you can apply Dazed to enemy units with your base attack. On top of that, we're going to be applying Unstable Oil, which we've already said is in the Ludern Tomb of the Ancients, and then Infectious. And Infectious Oil is in the Grinmere Alchemist. So Infectious Oil is going to have a 50% chance to basically apply 50% of the damage that you deal with this weapon as a DOT stack that will trigger damage at the end of the enemy's next turn, equivalent to however many stacks are on it. It's actually really strong. I really like it a lot. Moving on from that, we're going to go for an Akkadian Steel Brigadine, and this one I went with Reinforced Layers of the Rat because it gives me extra movement, and that's really important for this build because we're trying to get around and apply the extra DOT and Dazed onto enemy units, so we're not in that much of a pickle, as well as us also giving disarm to enemy units, and it'll really help us out. On top of that, we're going to be using the Pewter Mirror, which is in the Arthas Tomb of the Ancients, and that gives us a chance to apply Blackout every time that we engage in combat. So basically, we're going to be applying Blackout to enemy units, and then we're going to be able to apply Dazed, and we're really all about denying damage output in general. So altogether, I actually don't have that many extra skills added onto this unit. I went ahead and grabbed First Aid as whatever I had with it, and that kind of fits because we're going to be running around supporting and debuffing. We might as well have something to heal a little bit of damage here and there. On top of that, we can probably grab Run as well as Wrath. Those would all work really well. We don't necessarily need Taunt on this type of unit. After that, we're going to be focusing on the professions here, which would be Woodcutter would be best in slot for this because it gives you the extra strength and the extra hit chance, so we're actually able to do a little bit more damage. And then finally, for stat spreads, we got Willpower up to 15, and then we dumped the rest into critical hit after getting movement up to about 16 or 17. And last but not least, we are going to be getting into my personal favorite build of this group. Now, this build is called the Torturer. So obviously it's going to be very debuff and damage over time oriented. That being said though, let's go ahead and get on into it. Starting off, we are going to be grabbing the Duelist subclass. Now this subclass, once again, is going to be unlocked by completing the arena in Grinmere that happens to give you glory. So if you're following all of this, most of it does require you to go ahead and complete that arena for you to fully utilize a lot of these builds. So after we get Duelist, we're going to go ahead and grab Valor's Duel. And then on top of that, we're going to be grabbing Duelist's Instinct. So basically, as long as this unit is engaged in combat, they're going to have Brutality, and their critical damage is going to be increased by 30%. Now, the critical damage increased by 30% is from it being upgraded. Next up, we're going to be grabbing Hardcore Training. The reason we're doing this is just so we're immune to the status effects of Burning, because we are going to be applying Burning with this build, and I want to make sure that we don't have to worry about it later on. And obviously, when it's upgraded, you generate rage, and it's really nice. Next up, we're going to be grabbing Defensive Riposte, which is just going to give us, you know, that best in slot. We can disengage if we absolutely have to, kind of thing. And then we're going to grab the class specialization and then get daring, which is going to apply weakening whenever we have a bonus applied to us. So basically, as long as we're engaged, we are going to be able to apply weakening, because as long as we're engaged, we have brutality. And as long as we have brutality, we have a buff. So we're applying weakening. So it's, yeah, you can start to see where we're getting at here. Next up, we're going to be getting into our actually equipment here. And starting off, we're going to be using Strongblade. Now, Strongblade is once again one of those community items. And I am honestly not entirely sure which region it happens to be locked behind. I haven't managed to encounter it in the 1.0 builds, but I do know it is in the game. So you're going to have to be hunting down for it. As soon as I figure out exactly where it's at, I will be putting it in that pinned comment along with Claret. If someone comments on the video telling me where it's at, I will also make sure that that information gets added below. And on top of that, with Strongblade, we're going to be grabbing Poisonous Oil and Wedding Oil. Poisonous Oil currently is not available recipe-wise. That used to be tied to the Crime and Chaos path quest. However, you can get a single Poisonous Oil by helping out the Joan of Arc, so to speak, the lady getting burned at the stake in Arthas as soon as you get there from Tiltrin. So as long as you help her out, you'll get one Poisonous Oil. So there is a way to actually do this build without having to wait. And then Wedding Oil, and Wedding Oil is going to be found in the Ludern Nurpran clan. Next up, we're going to be using the Acadian Steel Brigandine, and this is going to be a mixture of Reinforced Layer of the Serpent and Reinforced Layer of the Rat. Once again, Serpent is not in the game as of now unless you have an early access build that lets you learn it. So right now, the best in slot for this is going to be Layer of the Rat. Once Layer of the Serpent gets re-released, I guess, you'll be able to use that as your best in slot. Then we're going to be using the Paladin's Roundel. Once again, you get this from Traveling Merchants or from a Inquisition Paladin type leader. And then obviously the Poisonous Oil Concentrate is going to be blocked by the path quest. I'm using it currently on this build. Obviously, you can replace this with a Wedding Oil Concentrate, which you're going to have. If you're able to craft Wedding Oil, you'll unlock the concentrate belt slot for it. So you'll be able to use that instead, and then you'll always be applying bleeds. Now that we've gotten into this, we're going to basically explain how this build works. And the way it works is essentially you're going to walk up and shield bash somebody. Whenever you shield bash somebody, you're going to either apply poison with the Poisonous Oil and Poisonous Concentrate combination, or you're going to guaranteed apply bleed with the Wedding Oil Wedding Concentrate. And not on top of that, with your shield bash from Flaming Strike, you're going to apply burning. So automatically you're going to have at least 2 debuffs on the enemy unit. And on top of that, the reason why I went with Poisonous Oil and Poisonous Concentrate is because poison can stack, whereas bleed and burn doesn't. So that you got to bear in mind with me as to why poisonous is the reason why we're doing the 100%, because it's stackable. And after that, we'll go ahead and use all of our other abilities. And then once we have at least 2 debuffs on the enemy, which should be basically after the flame attack, you go ahead and use Strongblade. And Strongblade is going to execute a standard attack and an additional attack for every stack of debuffs, of unique debuffs, that is, the enemy has when it comes down to bleeding, burning, and poison. So as long as you have bleeding and poison on the enemy, they are going to get attacked once for the standard attack and then 2 additional times. Well, since we're guaranteed to have burning and either bleeding or poison on it, and then you'll have a 50% chance for the other one, by the end of the first 2 or 3 attacks, you should have the 4th one, and you will get 4 attacks on Strongblade the entire time. And it's really nice. It's just fun to be able to deal a lot of damage in that sense. And then afterwards, you can proc Final Blow. By that point, you already have brutality while you're doing all this damage. So each additional hit has increased critical damage and increased base damage, and you're going to be hitting really hard. Now, is it going to be one-shot potential the same way that the tank can? No. Okay, to finish rounding out this build, we're going into attributes here. I honestly just get my movement up to 18. I get my willpower up to 15. After that, I dump the rest between critical and strength. And of course, because we're going critical and strength, we're going to be grabbing Woodcutter as the profession, because that is the best in slot for DPS melee strength build. Anyway, guys, that sums up the 4 advanced builds that I have, as well as the different locations for the items, the belt slots. If you guys have any questions about backpack items, quite frankly, they just go with whatever works best with your profession. They're really not going to be a make or break deal. We're going for, you know, complete synergy wise here. And honestly, backpack items don't matter at all when it comes down to overall combat synergy. Those are more of utility based for camps and other, you know, campaign-ish sort of things. And if you know where you can find the claret or the strong blade, please by all means mention that in the comment section below so I can get that pinned. Special shout out to Dorum for helping me track down all of these items so I'm able to help you figure out exactly where they are for this advanced build series, and his guide is going to be linked below in the description. By all means, go show him some love on the Steam Guide forums. Anyway, guys, that is all I've got for this video. If you like this content, want to see more videos such as this, like the video, let me know what your favorite swordsman build is in the comments below. And most importantly, make that number go up. And I hope to catch you all in my live stream chat or in the comment sections below. Until next time, have a good one.